On a Saturday morning in April of 1980, at the Pottawatomie County Equipment Auction in Council Bluffs, Iowa, a 24-year-old farmhand named Jacob Holcomb made what every man in the auction tent agreed was the worst decision of the year. He paid $275 for a 1947 Holmes 750 wrecker that hadn't moved under its own power in 14 years. The truck sat at the back of the gravel lot beside 3 rusted manure spreaders and a one-eyed Alice Chalmers tractor with the wheels removed. The burgundy-red paint had oxidized to a dusty pink that looked like a faded barn at sunset. The dual-boom rear was canted at 6 degrees with both winch cables frayed and rusted into single welded ropes. The chrome bumper had pitted through to bare metal in 3 places. Both running boards were gone. The Holmes 750 lettering on the rear deck was half peeled, the white paint flaking away in scales the size of fingernails. Someone had spray-painted junk across the driver's door in white block letters that looked like a child had done them. The auctioneer's voice came through the bullhorn tired. "Last lot of the morning, folks. 1947 Holmes 750 wrecker on a Chevrolet chassis, sold as is where is. This one's been sitting on the Bennington farm out near Carson for 14 years. Engine seized, hydraulics petrified, electrical eaten by rats. Probably good for the boom and the chains. Do I hear 300? Silence. A meadowlark called somewhere out past the fence line. 200? The auctioneer tried again. Somebody could pull the cable for scrap. Jacob raised his hand. 275. That's when the laughter started. Roland Driscoll, owner of Driscoll Recovery on Highway 6 out of Council Bluffs, the biggest tow operation in southwest Iowa, 14 modern wreckers, 3 locations, the Iowa State Police contract for the entire Western District, was leaning against the fender of his white Cadillac about 30 feet from the auctioneer's stand. Roland was 49 years old, 6'3", 300 pounds, with a gut that overhung the gold-buckled belt of his pressed Wrangler jeans, slicked back salt and pepper hair, a thick black mustache, ruddy cheeks, a white western-cut snap-button shirt with red and gold embroidery above the left chest pocket, and a tan Stetson cowboy hat tilted back on his head. He saw Jacob's hand and started laughing loud enough to scatter the meadowlarks. "Jacob Holcomb," Roland called across the lot, "you buying the Bennington truck?" Jacob didn't answer. "Sold to the young man for $275, the auctioneer said quickly, hammering the gavel. Roland walked over with both thumbs hooked into his belt loops. "Son, with respect, you just bought a hunk of yard ornament. That truck has been sitting in a field with the windows down since Lyndon Johnson was in the White House. I've got a 1976 Chevy C70 with a Holmes 480 on the back. I'd put you in for $90 a month, and you'd be hauling cars by next Friday." "I'll keep this one," Jacob said. "Son, that ain't a truck. That's a coffin Marie Bennington couldn't bring herself to bury." Jacob looked up at Roland Driscoll for the first time. "It's a 1947 Holmes 750, Jacob said. "Coffins don't have winches." Jacob borrowed his grandfather's flatbed trailer and hauled the Holmes 17 miles north to a converted dairy barn behind a small white farmhouse outside Macedonia, Iowa, where Otis Holcomb had lived alone since the 1968 tornado that took out the family farm near Walnut and killed Jacob's parents. Otis had raised Jacob from age 12. He was 68 years old in the spring of 1980, lean and weathered from a lifetime running a massive Ferguson dealership in Carson, with short steel gray hair thinning on top, a full gray mustache stained yellow at the tips from 40 years of pipe tobacco, lined sun-tanned skin with deep crow's feet at the corners of pale blue-gray eyes, large rough hands, and the slow, patient walk of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone. He wore a faded denim chore coat over a faded blue work shirt, dark gray wool trousers, brown leather work boots cracked at the toes, and a sweat-stained tan canvas farmer cap with the brim curved low. He stood beside the Holmes for a full minute without saying anything. He walked around it once, slowly. He took the pipe out of his mouth. He spat into the dirt of the barn floor. Then he put one large hand on the dusty pink hood. "Jacob," Otis said, "do you know what this is?" "A 1947 Holmes 750, Pap." "No, son. This is the truck Louis Bennington bought used in 1955 to start Bennington Towing out of his garage in Council Bluffs. He paid $400 for it, and it ran for him for 10 years before he re-enlisted for Vietnam. He flew Hueys with the 1st Cavalry. He went down over the An Lao Valley in October of 1966. The truck went home to Marie. She kept it in the back field for 14 years because she couldn't bring herself to sell it. This week, she finally let her son talk her into letting it go. "I didn't know, Pap." "Nobody told you, but it's a good truck." "Jacob, a Holmes 750 will outlast both of us if you treat it right. Louis Bennington was a careful man with machines. Will it run again?" "Anything will run again. The question is whether you have the patience to make it." "I've got patience." "Then you've got a truck." For the next 13 months, Jacob rebuilt the Holmes 750. He worked nights after his shift at the Conoco station on West Broadway and full days on Saturdays. He worked alongside Otis on the engine and alone on everything else. The Flathead 6 was seized solid. He bored the cylinders 50 thousandths over, ran new sleeves, ground the valves on Otis's old foot pedal grinder, replaced every gasket from a kit ordered through a Massey distributor in Omaha. The hydraulic system was full of black sludge. He flushed it twice with kerosene, replaced every seal, rebuilt the pump from a parts kit. The dual boom assembly had to come off completely. He pulled it apart, soaked the gears in solvent for 3 days, replaced both winch cables with new aircraft-grade steel rope. He sandblasted the body panels in his uncle's shed and shot fresh burgundy-red paint from a borrowed compressor. He replaced both running boards with planks of yellow pine he cut from a sawmill outside Glenwood. He never thought to check inside the structural cavity of the driver's side cab wall. There was no reason to. The wall looked solid, and the inside panel rang flat under his knuckle. He shimmed the new weather seal against it and bolted the door trim back into place. There were nights when Jacob slept on a cot in the barn beside the truck because the drive into town was 20 minutes too long. There were Sunday afternoons when Otis sat on a wooden stool in the open barn doorway with his pipe and his coffee and watched Jacob work for 3 hours without saying a word. By May of 1981, the Holmes was running. Jacob turned the key on a cold Sunday morning, and the flathead caught on the second try and idled rough for 40 seconds and then smoothed into the steady mechanical hum that the engineers in Tennessee had built it to make in 1947. Otis stood in the barn doorway with his hat in his hand. He didn't say anything for a long minute. Then he said, "Louis Bennington would be glad of that, Jacob. Take care of it." Jacob painted Holcomb Recovery on both doors of the Holmes in white block letters with a red drop shadow. He bought a phone line and ran it to the barn. He printed business cards at a print shop in Council Bluffs and left them at every grain elevator and farm supply within 50 miles. The first call came on a wet Friday in May 1981. A corn farmer named Vernon Hatch had buried a John Deere 4630 combine up to the rear axles in soft mud at the bottom of a creek-edge field outside Trainer. Vernon had already called Driscoll Recovery. Roland had quoted him $460 and a 6-hour wait. Vernon said he didn't have $460 and the rain was going to ruin his soybeans by then. Jacob pulled the combine out in 28 minutes with the Holmes 750's dual boom hand-cranked winch. Vernon paid him $60 and 3 bushels of seed corn that lasted Jacob through 2 full seasons of his own garden. By the end of 1981, Jacob had pulled 21 combines, 6 pickup trucks, 2 grain trucks, and 1 overturned silage tanker out of various corners of Pottawatomie and Mills counties. The Holmes started in cold weather. The Holmes ran in heat. The Holmes went down access roads where Driscoll's modern wreckers couldn't fit. By 1985, Jacob had 2 regular contracts, one with the Iowa Department of Transportation, one with a grain co-op out of Carson. He bought a second wrecker, a 1972 GMC 6500, but he kept doing the rough calls in the Holmes. Roland Driscoll still saw Jacob at the truck stop on Interstate 29 most Tuesday mornings. Roland had a regular booth in the back. Roland always made the same joke. "How's the Bennington widow's truck, Holcomb? Still running on prayers and corn silage?" "Still running, Roland. You ever pull a real truck with that thing?" "Pulled one of yours out of a ditch off Highway 92 last weekend. Your boy left the keys in the cab." Roland stopped joking after that one. By 1989, Driscoll Recovery lost its Iowa State Police contract to a national chain operating out of Omaha. By 1993, Roland had laid off 8 mechanics. By 1995, Driscoll Recovery filed Chapter 11. The auction of his fleet was held in the same lot in Council Bluffs where Jacob had bought the Holmes 15 years earlier. Jacob did not attend. He was on a job that day. By 1997, Jacob had 4 trucks and a real shop with a poured concrete floor and 4 roll-up doors on the south end of Council Bluffs. Holcomb Recovery had 2 contracts with the Pottawatomie County Sheriff, one with the Iowa Doughty and a side arrangement with the Volunteer Fire Department in Macedonia. He had married his high school sweetheart Annie in 1985, and their son Levi was 7 years old. In April of 1998, the Holmes was due for new weather seals on both cab walls. Jacob pulled the truck into the south bay of his shop on a Saturday morning. He removed the door cards on both sides. He pulled the inner trim panels off the structural cab walls. The driver's side panel rang hollow when he tapped it with his knuckle. He set the panel aside on the workbench and looked. Behind the structural panel of the driver's side cab wall, in a steel cavity that was not on any factory diagram, sat a flat waterproof tin the size of a large hard-cover book, covered in dust 32 years deep, sealed around the lid with a thin band of black tar. Jacob stared at it for a long minute. Then he reached into the cavity and lifted it out. The tar held. The lid was tight. He brought the tin to the workbench under a clip-on lamp and pried the lid loose with the corner of a flat screwdriver. Inside the tin, wrapped in 2 layers of waxed butcher paper, were 6 things. The first was a bronze star medal in its presentation case, the bronze still bright. The ribbon faded to a dull pink. The second was a Purple Heart medal, also in its case, with a slight dent in the heart's lower edge. The third was a small canvas pouch containing 48 $20 bills, all from the 1963 series, totaling $960. The fourth was a plain gold wedding band engraved on the inside with the date June 8, 1956, and the initials LB and MB. The fifth was a manila envelope containing 3 sepia photographs. A man in a pilot's uniform holding a toddler boy on his shoulders in front of a Council Bluffs grain elevator. A young couple smiling on the steps of a small clapboard church. And a single photograph of a small white farmhouse with a row of cottonwoods behind it. The sixth was a folded letter on 5 sheets of plain typing paper, dated June 4, 1965, in a tight, careful, right-leaning hand. It was signed Lewis. The letter was to a woman named Marie. He told her he was reporting to Fort Rucker for helicopter training the following Monday and would be deployed to the Republic of Vietnam by August. He told her the news from Saigon was worse than the papers were saying, and he wanted to be honest with her about what could happen. He told her the watch and the medals from Korea were not important, but the truck was. The Holmes had carried him through 10 years of work, and it had brought their son home from the hospital in 1957, and it would still be running long after the Army was finished with him. He told her if anything happened to him, the truck would feed her. He said he had hidden the cash and the medals and the wedding band behind the cab wall because he did not want her to find them and weep for him before she had to. He said he hoped that if he came home, she would never know about this letter. He said if she was reading it, she should know that he had loved her since the summer he had taken her to the Pottawatomie County Fair in 1952, and he had never stopped. The letter was signed, "Your husband, Lewis." Jacob put the letter down on the workbench. He sat on a wooden stool in his own shop and read it again. Then he read it a third time. Then he closed the tin back up, locked the shop, and drove home in the Holmes, and didn't tell anyone for 3 days. On the 4th day, Jacob drove to the Pottawatomie County Records Office in Council Bluffs and asked the clerk to pull the file on Lewis Bennington of Carson, Iowa. Captain Lewis Bennington Sr. had been born on the family farm outside Carson in March of 1929. He had served with the 24th Infantry Division at Pusan and Incheon during the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. He had married Marie Caulfield of Macedonia at St. John's Lutheran Church in Carson on June 8th of 1956. He had bought a 1947 Holmes 750 wrecker used in 1955 and had run a 1-truck towing operation called Bennington Towing out of his garage on Pearl Street in Council Bluffs. He had re-enlisted in 1962, completed helicopter flight training at Fort Rucker, deployed to Vietnam in August 1965 with the 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile, and had been killed in action on October 14, 1966, when his UH-1 was shot down over the An Lao Valley during Operation Irving. He was 37 years old. He had been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal posthumously. His widow, Marie, still lived on the family farm 3 miles outside Carson. She was 66 years old. Their son, Louis Bennington, Jr., was 41 and ran a feed store in Macedonia. Their grandson, Louis Bennington III, was 8. Jacob called Marie on a Tuesday afternoon. He told her who he was and what he had found. There was a long silence on the line. Then Marie Bennington said, "You'd better drive the Holmes out here and bring it." Jacob drove the Holmes out to the Bennington farm on a Saturday morning in May. Marie met him on the front porch of a small white farmhouse with a row of cottonwoods behind it that looked exactly like the photograph in the manila envelope. She was 66 years old, soft-built, with shoulder-length straight gray hair pulled back into a low, loose ponytail, hazel eyes that were the same color as her son's, gentle, weathered features, soft, warm dignity in her shoulders. She wore a soft denim button-up shirt over a plain white tee, faded blue jeans, brown leather loafers, and a thin gold chain with a small cross. She read the letter standing on her own front porch in the cool spring sunlight where her husband had kissed her goodbye in August of 1965. She read it twice. She held the wedding band in her open palm for a long time. She looked at the photograph of her young husband holding their son on his shoulders 33 years before. Then she looked up at Jacob and said, "He came back, Jacob. He just came back late." She invited Jacob inside and called her son Louis Jr. at the feed store and told him to come home immediately and to bring her grandson, because Grandpa Louis had finally come home. Roland Driscoll moved out of Pottawatomie County in 1996 and was last reported working as a dispatcher for a fleet operator outside Lincoln, Nebraska. By 2024, the 1947 Holmes 750 was 77 years old and still ran. Jacob kept it in the front bay of the Holcomb recovery shop. His son Levi runs the company now. The Bronze Star and the Purple Heart sit in shadow boxes on the wall above Levi's desk, with Captain Louis Bennington Sr.'s photograph between them and a brass plaque underneath that reads simply, "He came back late." Marie Bennington died peacefully in her sleep in 2017 at the age of 85. Louis Jr. keeps the wedding band in a small wooden box on his bedroom dresser. The boys who used to laugh at Jacob Holcomb don't laugh anymore. Most of them don't remember laughing, but Jacob remembers. And every time a young man asks him whether to buy a cheap old wrecker that everyone says is cursed, Jacob tells him the same thing his pap told him in the spring of 1980. Anything will run again. The question is whether you have the patience to make it. And sometimes the truck is carrying somebody home.